just been visiting, so we haven't missed anything. I'm supposed to turn on the mic. How's that? Do I need to eat this thing? Is that too loud? It's loud to me. Is it good to you? And in the back, that's the main thing. Okay, then I will try and eat it. That's what they call it, the business. I'm not in the business, but what I know about the business. They say you gotta eat the mic. And you can hear the difference in eating the mic. And it's just almost a natural thing for it to end up down here. And now you probably can't hear it all. So you gotta eat the mic. And if it's too loud, let me know. If I'm really eating it, it gets pretty loud. So let me know. Okay, I guess we'll start. Now that most people have joined us, how many of you have any idea who I am? Almost everyone. I'm a little bit surprised. I guess that's the only reason you would be here. Why would you come listen to some stranger? My name is Bob Wells, and I am nomad. I live in a van. I have lived in a van for a total of 17 years. I love living in a van. I consider myself a van evangelist. And if you follow my channel, you know I am preaching the good news of living in a van, living as a van dweller. That's kind of how I look at my life's calling and mission. Because I love it so much. And I believe there are profound and very important reasons why we should all live in a van. And that's what we're going to talk about today, what those profound and important reasons are. But we'll kind of get to that. I better get my notes because I don't know when to say. Okay. So let me give you, now, before we begin, let's deal with the issue of tiny house. How many of you have gone around and seen all these gorgeous tiny houses? And I'm talking about living in a van. So, am I reconciling to tiny houses? Am I promoting tiny houses? Am I here and just poo-pooing them? And so I think that's an important question. I want to address it right away. I look at living nomadically, living tiny, and tiny is a really good word, as a great big umbrella. And under this great big umbrella are lots of little tents. And in these little tents are different people who live tiny in a different way. And in that way they live tiny, there's not a right way or a wrong way to live tiny. Living tiny is an attitude and not a number. And what defines the attitude of someone who chooses to live tiny? In my mind, it's the decision, the heartfelt desire to live as small as you reasonably can. And the size that you can reasonably fit into will be different for everyone. And boy, do I know that. I talk about living in a van. But a bunch of the people who I talk to and communicate with, they can't live in a van. They just can't. They can't poop in a bucket. They can't do it without a shower. They can't do it without running hot water. And that's fine. I don't have the slightest bit of problem with that. It's a continuum, but it's the attitude. I want to live as small as I can because living small is good, is right, is better, feels the best for me. And if you have that attitude, you belong under the great big tent. You belong under the great big umbrella, and you are absolutely included in everything I say. Forgive me for using the word van because it's what I know, it's what I do. And so don't feel like I'm excluding anyone if I don't go through the litany. So let me give you an example. Among people who live in houses, and this is the big differentiation, people who live in houses almost always want a bigger house, don't they? Until they find one that's big enough and they say, yeah, a bigger house would be nicer, but this is just right. Maybe it's 2,000 square feet, maybe it's 2,500, maybe it's 1,600. They find a house, but always the idea is bigger is better. We have the idea that smaller is better. This is the smallest I can live in, but it's fine. And among house dwellers, there's kind of a snobbery that I live in a 8,000-foot mansion and you only live in a 4,000-foot mansion, so I'm better. Or I live in a really gorgeous 2,400 square feet, you only live in a 1,000-foot apartment, so I'm a little better. And there is a reverse snobbery among us. I feel it, I have it, I have to deal with it. And there is a reverse snobbery, whereas the guy who lives in the 40-foot diesel pusher thinks he's better than the guy that lives in the 2,400-foot apartment, a home, or the 8,000-foot apartment or whatever. But below him, the guy who lives in the 32-foot fifth wheel thinks he's better because he lives smaller, and below him is the guy who lives in a Class B because he's in a Class B, and then below him is guys like me who live in vans, and well, we don't have that big space and all that fancy stuff of a Class B. I'm better than you are. But then my friend Swan is sitting over here, and my friend Swan lives in a Prius. So I'm the loser. I don't win the snobbery part. But neither does Swan either. Sadly, a Prius is not as small as you can get. I have friends in Arizona who live on bicycles, and these aren't super athletes. I have a couple of friends that do this. They keep a storage unit in Quartzsite and a storage unit in Washington, their home state. And they take a bus back and forth, spring and fall, and a storage unit in both places. And in both places they have bikes, not great big, not $10,000 bikes, just a couple $100 bikes. And they have, probably from Walmart. And they have bike trailers, and they have tents, and they have a complete camping setup. They come down to Quartzsite when it starts getting rainy and cold here, something that probably a few of you know a little bit about, rainy and cold in the Northwest. And they get their bikes out of storage, and they go set up camp in the desert, and that's where they live. And then when it starts to get really burning hot, they take the bus. Sometimes they'll fly, they'll take the train, they'll go back. They live in a bike, literally live in a bike year round. They're not super athletes, they're not super rich. They're just Joes like you and I who are fit enough to make a bike their daily drive. He beats Sue-Ann. Living on a bike, beats Sue-Ann. But they're not even the winner. There's a guy in Moab who lives in a cave. He wrote a book about how he lives in a cave. He lives without money. So if we're going to have a contest, he's the king. If he came into the room, we would all have to. I'd say, you are the tiny master. It's an attitude, and I hope I can convey that. And I apologize if I in any way convey in anything I say anything else, and I don't mean to. Although, we're all snobs deep down inside. We all have the sense of I'm a little better, and we all fight against it. Most of us succeed pretty well. So that's when I say tiny, that's what I mean. A great big umbrella that is not a number and that we can all fit in.
Where do you park?
In a van?
Yeah.
Anywhere I want.
It's having a huge problem with people trying to make do. They've got jobs, they've got an income, but they can't afford to live anywhere. So
Yes.
they're living in their van, and they're getting asked continually to move and move and move.
In the city.
In the cities, that's a really major problem. I live, I'm retired, I don't work, and I live on public land. I have to move every 14 days to stay legal.
Okay.
I move every 14 days in the national forest or on BLM land in the desert.
Okay.
In the winter, I go to the desert, southwest, where it's much, much warmer and drier. And in the summer, I go up in elevation to where it's cooler. My favorite place is in Colorado, where you can get up to 8,000 to 10,000 feet, and the heat is no longer an issue. Yeah.
Do you eat nuts and berries?
I know. There are people that do, and actually I can't promote the idea of living that way, but no, I just live like I did. My life is not much different than it was when I was in an apartment by living in a van. It's pretty much the same. But I'm retired and have an income. I don't need to work. And so that solves that. Okay. So let me tell you how I started up. I ended up living in a van. What time is it? How much time am I taking too much of? 15 minutes already. I ended up living in a van I got divorced in 1995. I was 40 years old. I was in the middle of a midlife crisis anyway. I pretty much brought the divorce on myself. It was pretty much my fault. It's never all one-sided, but I played a large role. And I was miserable. I had never been a happy person. And so I got a divorce, and I couldn't afford two households. That's kind of the thing with divorce. All of a sudden, you have one household. And in America, most of us are barely getting by with one household, or no great abundance above. And I didn't have any abundance above, and so I could not afford to live and pay for the other household at the same time. And so I moved into a van. I was forced to move into a van, kicking and screaming. Of course, I was going through a divorce. I was miserable because I was going through a divorce, and I'd never been a happy person. And then when I moved into a van, I just felt like this total loser and failure. I cried myself to sleep, which when you're going through a divorce is not an unusual occurrence. My first night, I cried myself to sleep. And so I really felt awful. I hated living in a van. I was very ashamed of it. But as time went on, and not very long, within a few months, within 6 months, I stopped hating living in a van and started life. Okay, I got all the problems solved. Well, you know, you raise a question, well, where do you park? And I answered that question. How do you go to the bathroom? I answered that question. How do you cook? I answered that question. Living in a van is no more than camping in a rolling steel tent. And so that's what I did. Camping, I love camping. It wasn't a hardship. It was, after a while, it became a great joy to go camping every day. And that's what I did. I just happened to do it in the town because I was still working at that time. I did that for 6 years while I moved towards retirement. My kids got old enough to leave the house. They went with their mom, but I wasn't leaving until they were 18 and out on their own. And as soon as they were out on their own, I left them. This was all in last, and that's a whole other story. But I fell deeply and profoundly in love with living in a van. And for the very first time in my life, I felt like I fit in. My life made sense. I was happy. I was at peace. I found calm by living in a van. And it just made no sense to me. I had done everything society had ever told me. I had got married, bought a house, lived, had kids, and was working my way up a career. I was going to work out all my life and die out at the end of it. And so I've done everything that's society said, and my life was never happy, never contented. And now for the first time it was. And I looked around at the people I worked with, and none of them were happy and content with their lives. They all went to work at a job they didn't like. They didn't find fulfilling. They didn't find any meaning in their lives, any purpose in their lives. They just endured another day of work so they wouldn't starve to death. When they maybe get some money put ahead, maybe have some fun. Everyone tried to have all the fun they could along the way. And that's what your life amounts to, just trying to have some fun along the way, as much as you can as you endure your way to the grave. Contented, peace. That's how I would define it today. Then I didn't give it much thought. That was in 1995. I have spent my entire life since then trying to answer that question. What does it mean to be happy? How do we get happy? And why are we all so unhappy? That's been my life's purpose and mission since the day I realized I loved living in a van, and that everything society had told me was a lie. Because it didn't work. And it wasn't just because I was so weird. I was pretty weird, but it wasn't just because I was so weird. It didn't work for anybody I know. Let me tell you really quick, throw this statistic out. Since the year 2000, the Gallup poll has been doing a survey of worker satisfaction in America. They do this enormous survey, and then they sell it to the corporations. This is how you can engage your workers more. That's how they make their money. They do the survey, then they sell it to the corporations. And they'll do it with an individual corporation. And so over the last 19 years, they've been doing it for 19 years straight, and the total is, number of people is like 10 or 15 million people they've polled. And very consistently across all this time, and it's not just me, it's not my friend, that's my point. Most people in America hate their jobs, or just tolerate their jobs, and just tolerate, therefore, their lives, because their jobs will take their whole life. So the numbers work out to about this. Between about 18 and 33% are engaged at work. They like their job. They're excited to go to work. There's some of you here. There's about a third. And the average, it looks like it's about 28 or 29% of Americans over this long time frame, 19 years. And then at the very bottom, they have what they call actively disengaged. They despise their job so much that they go to work and steal and actively try to harm their employer. These people are actively disengaged. And that, I'm going to look at that number. My brain is not going to. That's 18, that looks like, and I have a table that shows every year for the last 19 years. Looks like it averages it out about 18% of Americans. It's around 20%, a little less than 20%. 30% really like their job, they're glad they're going to work that day, they feel excited about it. Around a little less than 20%, 18, 19%, despise their job, hate their job, are going to go to work and harm their employer any way they possibly can and keep their job. The sales clerk you run into that is so awful, they might be a really nice person. They're just hurting the company when they drive you away. That's a real distinct possibility. And everyone else in between is what they call engaged. They're not actively engaged, they're not actively disengaged, they're just engaged. In other words, it's the job, it feeds the family, I'm going to go, I don't hate it, but boy, I don't like it. I'm just doing, and that describes me, probably describes nearly everyone in this room. That you just go to work because you got to work, and it's a pretty good job, and so I'll go, and that's it. And there are a few of you here, there's probably about 30%, who love their jobs, but you are the exception. Yeah. Okay, so it wasn't just me. That's the way this country works. Very few of us are happy with our lives and fulfilled with our work and find meaning and purpose. And so why not? And so I've devoted the last, since 1995 to answer that question. And what I'm going to tell you today is the answer that I have discovered. Before we do that, now, those of you who are living tiny now, you're living in a van now, you're going tiny, you start telling your friends, and they all say, that's crazy, how can you live in that small space? That's what everyone says. And then they have all these questions, like where are you going to park, how are you going to go to the bathroom, and on and on and on. But even if you're in a tiny house, you still have those questions. So, these are the answers that probably all of us give. And these are really, really good answers. These were mine. You do it because you need the money. You know, if you can buy, there's some really nice $50,000 tiny houses here, instead of buying a $300,000 tiny house, regular house. Well, you save so much money, you can own your own house. And for those, there are a lot of people who can't afford to pay rent and work. That's become a standard problem here in America today. Moving into a van just solves that. Now they can live in a van and save all that money. I did that. Every month, at the beginning of the month, I didn't pay a landlord for 6 straight years. I paid myself. That meant rents were in Anchorage were going to be about $800. That meant every month I put $800 in my pocket and saved. And so that's a big reason why economics are a big reason why you want and I wanted to live tiny under this tiny umbrella of tiny living. The next big reason was freedom. Not only was I able to live now and save, I'd never been able to save before, now I was saving money every month. And even after the divorce and having 2 households, I was still able to save a little bit of money every month. The next one is freedom. Not only was I saving money every month, but I was enjoying my life. I could wake up wherever I wanted. I could go wherever I wanted. Alaska fishing is the thing, and I could just drive. I didn't have to worry about going camping and going fishing. I just drove the van after work. That night after work, I drove down to the Kenai and went fishing. I was free. I had this freedom. My life was on wheels, and I could live it and however I wanted to live it. I could go where I wanted to go, when I wanted to go, however I wanted to go. And that was a freedom you never had. And so that was a big reason, probably a reason why a lot of you want to live tiny, is the freedom that it offers you. Living tiny is a compromise between freedom and comfort. If you buy one of these really nice $30,000, $50,000, $80,000 tiny houses, you're not going to be nearly as free as I am in a van. You can't go the places I can go. I can go into some really deep woods. You will not have the freedom that I have because it costs more to maintain, it costs more, and you can't go drive, and it costs more to drive, and it takes a much bigger truck, and on and on and on. So there's always a compromise and a balance between freedom and comfort. The smaller, the less comfort, the more freedom. So that's why we all make a decision about how small, this is as small as I can live. I'll give up all this freedom, but that's fine, because I want the comfort. Why I don't live in a Prius? I can't live with that discomfort. So we all have a limit. Why I don't live on a bike? I'm not going to live on a bike. It's just not going to happen. That's the ultimate freedom. Yeah, those guys need almost no money. They have food to eat. That's about all they need. Consumerism. Nearly all of us want to live tiny because we want to break out of the consumerist society that we're in. I see heads nodding. We hate the whole consumer Christmas. This wonderful thing has been turned into this nightmare. Just all of our holidays are turned into nightmares. Our lives are turned into nightmares of wanting more. And I think a lot of us want to live tiny because it breaks us out. We're not going to be part of that consumerist society anymore. A lot of us to break out of the rat race and out of the hamster wheel. After a while of living so cheaply and saving some money, I was a union clerk. I worked in a grocery store all my life, literally all my life, for 30 years. And I was a union clerk. I went in and said I had seniority over everyone. I've done it for a long time. I was the only fool that endured it that long. And I said, I've got seniority. I'm only going to work 32 hours a week from now on. He said, oh, great. I don't want to pay you journeyman wages anyway. And so I stepped down and worked 32 hours a week for the last 5 years because I can afford it. My life was so much better because I had a 3-day weekend every weekend. My life was far better. I think it was the only way I was going to endure working there until get my retirement was by taking a 3-day weekend every single week. So that worked out really well. But in that way, I was still in the rat race, but I had broken out of it quite a bit. And if you can save enough money by living so cheaply, you can get out of the rat race much earlier. At any rate, you can live so cheaply by living in a car, van, or RV, or tiny house maybe, that if you have a job you really hate, you can go tell that boss to shove it and go find a job you do like. You may not be able to break out of the rat race, but you can work less. I know people who live in vans who work 6 months a year, take 6 months off. You can do that when you live that cheap. You eliminate the cost of housing. You live really cheap, and you can tell your boss to take it and shove it. Sometimes that feels really, really good. Just the thought, whenever I change the job, just the thought, I'm going to tell my boss that I'm quitting. And that was the greatest joy, one of the greatest joys I've ever experienced. Knowing for a month or two I was going to quit. So you get out of the soul-sucking drudgery and monotony of the 9-to-5 grind, the rat race, the hamster wheel. And finally, there's simple minimal living. And I think that's probably an urge within all of us. We want to live simpler. Well, there's something in us that wants to live in a tiny house, to live on wheels, to be able to move, and to not need much of anything at all. It's just right. We feel it into the very heart of ours. And maybe I can't even completely justify it to you. I don't have to. I know it to the very core of my being. That's the right way to live. And so I think that's what it is for a lot of us. If it's a tiny house, if you live in a van or a Prius or on a bike, you can't own much. And if you live in a tiny house, you can't own much either. You've all probably watched the shows, the tiny house living shows, and the host hands the couple a box and say, you fill this box, that's what you get. Okay, well, we hate it. They all hate it. I hated it. We love it. There's something in our heart wants that to happen, to break free of consumerism and live a simple, minimal life. And the freedom of being able to will come to be able to tell a boss, take this job and shove it, if you can live that cheap. And finally, most of us find a meaning in life. There is a meaningfulness in living in harmony with the planet, living in harmony with our hearts. Our hearts are in line with our head, probably for the first time in our life. We're not living this crazy American treadmill life of buying more and more and more, and we break off of that. And for the first time in our life, we have meaning and purpose. And human beings are creatures that need to have meaning and purpose. We don't live well if we do not have a meaning. Why am I waking up today? This is why. What difference will my life have made because I was here? This is why. And if you have that, you have everything that counts. And the American way of life is anathema to that. It's the exact opposite of that. It's love money, love things, get more, get a job, work forever, quit the job, die soon thereafter. That's the American. There's no meaning. There's no very little purpose. Well, I contributed to society. I was a good member of society. Well, okay, that's enough. That's enough for a lot of people. If that's enough for you, that's good. It isn't enough for me. Okay, so that's actually what we probably all of you have thought about. Nothing there. And actually, now I'm just ready to begin my talk. We've gone half an hour. I'm not going to. So we're going to call it quits right there because that's enough. And I'm not even going to start on the rest because it'll probably take another half an hour. So, any questions? Any comments, thoughts that you might have? Yes.
Where's your favorite place to look at your van?
Boy, it's so hard. anywhere beautiful, and there's so, and you know, that's the thing. We live in the most beautiful place in the world, this country. I mean, there's the variety, yeah, there's lots of places in the world that are as pretty, or even prettier. But there's no one place that has so much, you know, I mean, where's my favorite place? Probably, I would say maybe Jackson, Wyoming, because you're right outside of, you can leapfrog from there to so many places within a day's drive. When you live on wheels, you can start to think of a day's drive, 2 days drive, and you're there. It's an amazing place. And maybe you'll only do that 2 days drive every month. But all of it becomes yours. You don't have to choose your one. You can just leapfrog to that next fantastic place. And so fortunately, I don't have to choose one. I can take them all. Yeah.
Where do you, so when, I know how to park in Arizona, and I know how to park in Oregon, and I used to park in California, but it's all changed now. So where do you park in Jackson Hole, Wyoming?
Okay, I'll tell you. See, the question is, I boondock because I live on public land, which is either BLM land, which is desert land in the southwest, mostly, or on, it's all across the west, but that's mostly where it is, or national forest land. So the question is, how do you find boondocking spots? How do you find those places? In the desert, they're everywhere. I mean, you can't throw a rock without finding a good boondocking spot in the desert. In the national forest, it's a little harder. It's not much harder. The first tool to use to find a good boondocking spot is a website called freecampsites.net. And people like you and I can go on and contribute our campsites that we find. And they'll have a map, it'll have the GPS. You click on the GPS and Google will take you right there. So the first thing to do is wherever you go, use freecampsites.net. And then after a while, there are tools you learn and ways. National forests have what is called, and BLM land, have something that is called dispersed camping. And that means it's camping, it's legal, no ranger will stop you as long as you obey the rules. It's almost always 14 days, leave a clean camp, don't leave a mess, don't do any harm, don't set up residence. If you do all that, you're fine. And it's everywhere, virtually everywhere in the national forest. My experience has been, if it's illegal to disperse camp here, it's their obligation to put up a sign and tell me. If there's no sign, I can disperse camp. And so really the key thing is just to get good maps, to find the maps that go off in the national forest, find a place that looks interesting to you. Okay, the first time I came to Oregon, I wanted to find a place that was into the mountains, that I knew would have internet, that was near a town where they would have 4G internet, and a grocery store. So I found Lakeview, Oregon. And I got out a topo map of Lakeview and looked around, and there are mountains that ring, and they're all national forests, that ring Lakeview, Oregon, which is just south there, southeast there. Beautiful town. Has a Safeway, has all the shopping I needed. The Safeway's good enough. And I found, and they were all national forests, and because the town itself will have 4G, I knew that if I could find a camp that looked down the mountain at the town, it would not only be beautiful, but I could have 4G because they were all within close enough. And so I just got out, I went on Google Earth and found all the roads, and I found a road, and I said, I can almost certainly camp right there. I put it on the satellite view, and I found a great big open area, and I drove straight to it. That's how I found a camp with everything I wanted, and it was high enough. It was at 5,000 or 6,000 feet easily. So it was hot. I mean, it would get up into the low 90s, which is hot, but I was in the national forest and I could park in the shade, and be in the shade. So that's how you find boondocking spots. Any other questions? Yep.
So the people like many different types of size dwellings.
Mm-hmm.
What about being solitary and being in a community or being with other people in caravan?
Well, like I said, that's a great question. Like I said, I've devoted the last, so what would that be, 22 years of my life to finding out what really goes on in human beings. And what I have found is the gist of what I'm not going to tell you comes from Carl Jung. Carl Jung had a phrase that he called the 2 million year old self. And the idea was that He also called it the archaic man, the indigenous man. We have a 2 million year evolutionary history. And to live and be, and that, so for the first 2 million years of human existence, pre-human existence, humans, Homo sapiens, you and I, have existed for about 200,000 years. The earliest fossil record is about 200,000 years. Homo sapiens that look pretty much exactly like you and I, had the same brain capacity and same thought capacity. That's about 200,000 years. But the primates outreach before them, hominids are what they called, pre-humans, pre-Homo sapiens are called hominids. They broke away from the primates. They weren't primates, they weren't humans. They were hominids in different branches, a million different branches. The Neanderthals were one you'll know. We evolved in the scientists call it the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness. I'm talking about evolution, and there are some of you who are uncomfortable with that. Believe me, my life is based 100% on spirituality. I am a complete, absolute believer in design. What's the word? Intelligent design. There's no doubt in my mind. Absolutely none. But I don't see any conflict between an intelligent designer and evolution. So I want to learn and live my life based on reason and science and spirituality. And there are some people that aren't comfortable with that, and that's their choice. So we evolved to become a certain thing. What we evolved to become are nomads. Nomads always lived in very small groups, very small bands, maybe 50 to 100 people, and we were very dependent on each other. The idea was that these small bands of humans, most humans would never go a day without being in direct eyesight of another human being. And for the most part, many other human beings. To be alone was to be dead. There's always a pack of hyenas out there. There's a pride of lions, a pack of wolves. A single human was alone, was dead. So we lived this. So my goal is to create a nomadic tribe where community and connection is at the core of it. And you probably don't know many people more reclusive than I am. And it is so very weird that this is my calling in life. I will leave here and go and do everything I can to be completely alone. And yet I have people around me all the time against my will, and it has been very healthy for me. And I don't understand all of that, but I do know that we are designed as, we are designed, I believe the intelligent designer planned it this way, that we live tiny and be willing to move. See, the bottom line was that between the seasons changed, the climate changed. The history of humanity has enormous amount of climate changes, from cold to hot, cold to hot. The game always moved. The Eskimos, nearly all tribal people, the game moves. They have to move with the game. They have to move with the weather. The people that could move the easiest and the fastest survived, and those that couldn't died. So nature selected on nomadism. That's why you are here. You want to live tiny because that's what is ingrained into your DNA. Living tiny is written into your DNA. And the main premise of Carl Jung, and we were going to mainly look at Carl Jung, is that all your problems, all your mental, emotional, the modern illnesses of humanity come from living contrary to our environment of evolutionary adaptiveness. We live, the consumer rat race is the worst thing you can do to a human being, and that's why we are having mass shootings. That's why we have an epidemic of suicide. We have an epidemic of depression in this country. The depression is just incredible. The illness, the mental illness of the mass shootings, obviously. It's because there's this 2 million-year-old man and woman that lives in each of us, and he is miserable by the way we live. So the closer you can live to nomadic living, and that's an attitude. It isn't going out and becoming a hunter-gatherer. We're not going to do that. But it's the tiny living. It's the tiny thinking. I don't need stuff. Stuff is a burden. Nature selected on the human that didn't have many things. So when the game dried up, when there was a blizzard, and there shouldn't have been a blizzard, when a dam burst, and now he lived on a lake, he could move like that. The one that could move like that, who couldn't care less about leaving his stuff behind and going and living somewhere else, they survived, everyone else. That's what we're doing. We're pacifying and making him happy within us, the archaic man. That's the main phrase Carl Ann used. The archaic man, 2 million year olds. That underlies everything else that I said earlier about why we all want to. That's the driving, motivating force. My heart cries out to live tiny, and that's why. It's evolutionary. It's written in your DNA. Okay, another question. Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Tom O'Brien was on Coast to Coast with AM last night, and he was talking just along those same lines of your attitude and the health, so much more healthy to get out in nature and de-stress, and you can't actually, your cells don't rejuvenate themselves with all of these toxins and our modern day living. And so beyond job satisfaction, our modern life is killing. The Japanese are a prime example.
They are. It is. So that's interesting. Yes, that's one of the core things that motivates everything I've done is being in nature. And most all of you, when you choose to live tiny, say you're going to go to a tiny house, you're probably going to buy a lot somewhere, probably in the country, and you're going to go and you're going to be closer to nature than you've ever lived before. And so that's the appeal. And I live in a van. I go and live in the woods or in the desert. Other than now, I'm having to spend a lot of time in the city with my mom. But as soon as that, before and after, I would live 365 days a year in nature. Never once in the town. That's always my first choice and what I've accomplished. And there's a lot of science now about the impact of nature, and it's the lack of nature on us. We need nature. Again, it's the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness. 100% of the time was in nature, none of the time was in a house. Sometimes it was in a cave, frequently it was in a cave. A lot of times there were wiki-ups. If you've done any survival, looked into survival, every survivalist can tell you how to build a wiki-up. Well, that's what most humans lived in. The Eskimos would go and literally go out and live in the winter when they were after seal or whale. They'd go out and live in igloos. Well, the igloo would melt come spring. And so they always had a temporary structure. They were always moving. They were in nature and they were moving. And they were in very close, tight-knit bands. That's what it means to be nomadic. And that's what that outline is everything I teach in my website and on my YouTube channel. That outline, being in nature, living small, living close to other humans. Yes?
So, unlike you where I can live, head out and be alone a lot. So how do you plug into this tight-knit band community thing, that we all need too?
Yes.
Because I'm very good at being alone.
We think a lot alike. Our heart beats in a lot of the same ways. We've created something called caravans. If you follow the YouTube channel, we've created something called caravans. The idea behind the caravans is they're in nature. They're on either BLM desert land or they are in national forest land. Right now, they're in Oregon. Are we still some in Washington?
Yeah, one in Washington.
One in Washington, one in Oregon. So you can join the caravan, and here's the great thing about the caravan. You'll be out. You'll either be in the desert, which is just a very big open area, or you'll be in a national forest. You can park on the far outskirts, and a lot of people do. And then maybe that day you're feeling like being with people, and you can come into the fire that night, or you're not. Maybe that day is a day you won't need to be alone. And so you're parked, but you're removed. Your choice. How close can you get? That's up to you. And I think most people find they are drawn in, and they come in more and more, and they as they build these bonds. So the caravans are my answer. Now, what happens with most nomads that I know, people who are living in cars, vans, and RVs, We scatter to the wind in the summer because we all want to go find the next beautiful place. We can't go there in the winter because it's covered with snow. So we go there in the summer, and we travel mostly alone in the summer. The caravans are small all summer. Then in the winter, when we gather in the desert, they're big. I mean, we had 4 caravans, 30, 40 people apiece, and more. And this was our first year. We're just now almost ready to complete our first year of the caravans. They'll get bigger every year. So the caravans are the answer, because that's the way nomads live. They lived in groups of 30 or 40. They traveled together. Some of them, and we don't have to worry about, fortunately, about tax lions, prize lions, tax lions. You can be out on the far outskirts, get all the alone time you need, and then come in when you're ready. That's our vision to solve that problem. Yes, ma'am.
How will you find out about those caravans again?
Well, they're easy. You go to I started a nonprofit, a 501c3. Sue Ann, my partner, does 99% of the work. But I started it. We're co-founders, yes. We are absolutely one co-founders. I just tend to be the one who gets the credit. I have to really work against that. She nodded.
Bob's a spokesmodel.
Huh?
You're a spokesmodel.
I am. I'm the one up here, so everyone thinks I'm so hot. She's doing 99% of the work. Literally, 99% of the work. I've forgotten what was the question.
So how do you?
So you go to, I apologize. You're gonna have to give me some more Diet Pepsi here. You go to Homes on Wheels Alliance, Homes on Wheels Alliance, that's the 501c3/caravans. That will give you all the basic information you need about the caravans. And it will also send you to a meetups page. If you're not familiar with meetups, it is a website where you can organize meetups, literally, and about any topic or anything. And we have, our caravans are listed under the meetups page. And you can then go there and find exactly where they are at that moment. We don't post them ahead. You can only find where they are right now. But they're there, they're ongoing, and you can join them. You can go join one right now. You pull out your phone right now and join a caravan. And then you can drive, it'll give you a GPS spot, you can drive there, and you can be in a caravan tonight. And again, in the summer, they're pretty small, but in the winter, they get much larger. And this is our first year, and I think they'll get bigger. We're not sure exactly how we're going to go. The caravans are what I believe are the big solution for the future of people making connections. Yes, ma'am.
So that is what I want to know, because I do follow the caravans, and I'm waiting to get a rig. It's not the easiest process in the world.
It isn't anymore.
No.
Not that you can afford.
Yeah, I've been looking since March, pretty much daily. But I plan on getting there. My question is, are the caravans working towards the RTR? Is that the ultimate goal, is to get all the caravans to the RTR?
Right.
Awesome. That was an easy one.
To get them to the RTO?
What we do is what we're called snowbirds. We're moving with the seasons, which is what human beings have done for 2 million years, move with the seasons. And the idea of staying in one season and fighting nature never occurred to a human being before, because they never had that kind of arrogance. I can control and dominate nature. We're not trying to control and dominate nature. We move with it. If it gets snow and cold and rain, we move. So they are moving south, and as it gets, the desert's way too hot to be in. We're not going to go fight the desert and live in miserable in it. We're not going to stay up in here and live in miserable cold. We're going to move with the season, and as the seasons gets colder here and warm and cooler, as it gets colder here and cooler there, because the desert has to cool down, we'll move south. And eventually we will end up in November in Arizona somewhere, right? We'll end up somewhere, probably Quartzsite, and Quartzsite is a small town in the Arizona desert, on the Colorado River, and it's a kind of a center, and we circle the caravans around it because it's set up perfectly for nomads, for RVers and van dwellers. And it would be fine for a tiny house too, because the desert is for the most part open to tiny houses. You can get them down most of the roads, not all the way, but somewhere. So yeah, the caravans are headed towards the desert. in the spring, they're headed north to the high country where it's cool, and in the fall, they're headed south to the desert where it's warm.
Right, so just to go back on that just a teeny bit, I noticed that they're kind of, the one that I'm following particularly, which I think is Sioux's, but they're really close to California. So is there still a debate about whether we're gonna be in Arizona or whether we're gonna be in California?
Oh, the RTR? We discussed, we were talking about that before. Yeah, we don't know where the RTR is going to be. The RTR stands for the Rubber Tramp Rendezvous, for those of you who may not be familiar. The Rubber Tramp Rendezvous is a gathering I started 10 years ago, and now Sue Ann and I host. Last year we had between 8,000 and 10,000 people. It's gotten harder to find a place for 8,000 to 10,000 people. We haven't nailed it down for this year. We will. There will be an RTR. But it hasn't been nailed down yet. We think at this moment, we're almost, we think we've got it nailed down. We're just waiting on the BLM. BLM is Bureau of Land Management. They manage nearly all desert land that is owned by the government. And we're waiting on the final word for them. It will probably be in California. We need a bigger place. Yes, ma'am.
Another question, is there a difference between staying on national forests or national parks?
Yeah. The question was, is there a difference between staying in a national park or a national forest? Yeah, they're totally different. Very, very few national parks have dispersed camping. Very few, there's a few, but boy, and I do mean few, and even then it's pretty restricted. National forests almost always have dispersed camping, and it's free camping wherever you choose. That almost never exists in national parks. That's the key difference. The national parks are managed for preservation. They fit recreation in wherever they can, but the goal of a national park is to preserve this land forever. The goal of a national forest and the BLM is to use the land. Recreation is probably the primary use, but it's also open, and this is what the country has wanted, and I think it's reasonable. It's also open to running cattle, it's open to mining, it's open to logging, it's multi-use. And the national parks are not multi-use, they are preservation. We'll work in recreation where we can, but it's preservation first. Yeah.
Has there been any consideration to possibly remain in Quartzsite area by breaking up by size?
Well, the question was, is there any possibility that we could remain in Quartzsite if we break up in size?
And you could have large rigs in California.
Well, the size of the rigs is an issue. We've thought about if we had to. It's looking more like the BLM in Arizona wants us to go away. And actually, what's finally, we could probably go back to where we were last year. It was far from good, far from ideal, but it was acceptable. We could go back there, but they've made an economic issue, which is going to make it tremendously expensive. We will have to, if we go back there and nothing else changes, the BLM will require us to charge $6 a day for every person the entire time.
$6 a day?
$6 a day for every person that's there. And of course, the whole goal is that it always be free. Or at most, an optional donation to pay. It's very, very expensive to work in RTR. We spent $11,000 last year on toilets, porta potties. So that kind of looks to us like they're trying to get rid of us. So Quartzsite is looking less and less. We're fighting that. We're working with them to see if we can get it changed, but so far they won't listen. There was a question back there. Yes, ma'am.
Is that $6 a day that they're trying to charge for everyone, is that going to put on the RTR, or are they taking that money?
Yes, that money will go to the BLM. We will.
Right.
You'll hand it to us, and we'll hand it to them. Yeah, that's their charge for recreation, for use of the land. Yeah.
Have you ever been to the spiritual center of Joshua Tree? The Joshua Tree?
The spiritual center?
Yeah, there's a spiritual center of Joshua Tree. That's where the Contact in the Desert was held there several years. One year we had 8,000 to 10,000 people right there.
In Joshua Tree?
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, and that's spiritual. They've got facilities there.
Oh.
Not in the park.
Not in the park, in the town.
Oh, in the town.
No, there's a park there, a spiritual center.
Is it
And
in
they've got a
town?
pool, they've got showers, they've got meeting areas, you know, coast to coast, and contact in the desert, you know, speakers and everything. That was huge.
Okay, do you mean a town?
No, it's outside of the town.
But not in the national park?
It's not in the national park though.
The spiritual center, no, it's a private reserve.
Right.
Oh, yeah, there's private land we could go with, but we're gonna have to pay.
Yeah, and what you, $8,000-10,000 might cover it. Just what you're paying on porta potties might cover to rent the whole place.
It is possible, and so we're wanting to be on private, on land.
You're looking to buy someplace.
We are looking to buy
There's 100 acres right next door for, I think, $400,000. And so you have all that, you double the amount of places to park, and you just have, it would help the spiritual center, and you have all the facilities already put together.
Well, if we can't stay on BLM land, then yes, we will look at paying places and charging. Descend Bend is coming up. Who knows what Descend Bend is? It's not very many. It's a big van dwelling gathering, and there it's $100 for 5 days. And that's normal. I mean, most people expect to go to a big event and pay. If we have to, we'll charge. My goal is to never charge. I see one of my primary audiences has very low income, who for $100 would be a real sacrifice to go to an event. And I don't want to exclude anyone based on money if I can possibly avoid it. If we can't make it work with the BLM, then we're going to look at places we can charge. It'll be a last resort. Any other questions? This is probably not a lot of interest to most of you. Yeah?
No, it is interesting. It's kind of over my head, but just for starting out, how do you define, you said boondocking earlier for BLM. Most BLM won't have an issue with paying. You can just find places that are BLM designated and observe the rules and be a good camper.
To camp for free?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The BLM is not an issue finding a place to camp for free. No. BLM again is desert land. Who owns the land? If it has trees, it's national forest. Although some of those trees don't look like much, you wouldn't think this is a tree or a forest. They call it a forest, and so that's what it is. Basically, BLM is worthless land no one wants. And in the desert Southwest, if you drive down any road, you look around, it's probably either going to be military, a lot of military in the desert Southwest, or BLM. And you just get out a map, and a few maps will show BLM land. And then if it's BLM land, you just drive down the road and camp. You're going to be okay. There's a lot of BLM camping. But that's only in the desert because it's going to be hot. There's a lot of BLM land in Oregon. Not much in Washington, is there? There is some eastern Washington. If it's worthless land, it might very well be BLM. And there's some in Oregon. There's quite a bit of BLM land. It's going to be high desert in Oregon, so it's going to be fairly hot in the summer, and it's going to be quite cold in the winter. And not many of us camp in Oregon on BLM because of that. We're snowbirds. We move with the weather. Okay, that's all. Well, yeah, one more question, and then it'll be noon and we've got to stop. Is what?
The land for the cattle drives and stuff, is leased to farmers or ranchers.
Well, yes, nearly all, the majority of either BLM or National Forest land I've been on, they run cattle on. But that doesn't mean you're not allowed to camp them. Recreation, in that case, now maybe there'd probably be exceptions. Not a lot. Usually I've camped with a lot of cattle. I've been in camps where I woke up and I was completely surrounded by cattle. And I've driven down a lot of BLM roads and had to wait for a herd of cattle or sheep to cross in front of me. Yeah, it's multi-use. BLM and National Forest are multi-use. And that's just because there's cattle on it doesn't mean you can't be on it recreation. But maybe it does. It would be their obligation to tell you, as far as I'm concerned. If they don't put up a sign, I'm going to go camping. Okay, I think we're done because it's noon and probably most of you want to get going, and I think we've covered all these things.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank
Very
you
good.
for coming.
All right, we're here at the Tiny Fest, and I didn't get a chance to answer anyone's comments. I got Bob's permission to record this event. So if you guys don't know, Bob Wells is tiny home, not tiny home, what do you call it, RTR. Went to a couple of his events and he was a guest speaker here. So I want to thank everyone. So this is in Oregon at the Polk County Fairgrounds. And just a lot of vendors here. Hi. That's my neighbor. So let me sit down here. Hey, David Carlisle, how are you? Hope you enjoyed that presentation. Let me sit down here. We got some music. Eli, what's happening? Yeah, I wasn't able to talk. Like I said, Bob is got a YouTube channel that I've been following. And let's see the comments here. Live chat. Hey Eli, how are you guys doing? It's a beautiful day here in Oregon's Polk County. How was the picture and the sound? Was it good? I just thought I'd go live, and like I said, I did get permission, so and I'll be uploading a video or two on this event. So thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate you all, and have a wonderful day. It was good. It was clear, David. Cool. Yeah, it's a good time here. I already did a couple videos on the tiny home tours here. Sounds good, right on. Yeah, it's a beautiful day here. All right, thank you guys. In this here and